Hi, this is Michael Waits recording live from Money 2020 Asia 2025 in Bangkok. Thank you for joining us for this special edition of Insurance for the New Possible, where we discuss the future of finance, technology, and insurance. We are joined today by Jonas Eichhorst. I tried.
Pretty good.
Pretty good, thank you. The CEO at Timo Vietnam. Thank you so much for joining us at Money 2020 Asia 2025 and for coming on Insurance for the New Possible. I really appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me.
How are you doing today, by the way?
Good. It's been a busy few days, but all good.
I'm sure it has. Okay, let's just jump right into this. With all of the hype around generative AI, agentic AI, and artificial general intelligence, like there's AI everywhere. Why do you think the biggest opportunity for Timo is to turn it into the most human company ever?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. And we always want to kind of think contrarian and go the next step. And right now, everybody's talking about AI, obviously. But if AI becomes table stakes, right now, 2-3 years ago, I was talking about AI as augmented intelligence, so make humans be able to do more. I still hear a lot of people now talking about AI with this idea of we'll be really, really smart and AI will support in the intelligence side. But I don't really think long-term that that's actually going to be true, because AI will become smarter and smarter versus humans, which actually have a certain ceiling. So how can we differentiate as a company? And my view is there's two paths that companies long-term can take. They can use AI to drive down cost like crazy and just automate. And that's a perfectly valid strategy. The other way is to use humans for things where intelligence actually is not the limiting factor, and that is more on the emotional side. So that's kind of the path that we want to go down.
Can you give us an example of what you mean? Right, because you don't want the humans that are there not to be super intelligent, but you also want them to have some sort of empathetic connection to their customers. In which places do you think that that's really important?
You're 100% correct. And for us, the way we think about everything is there's the rational side and there's the emotional side. And financial institutions have been really, really heavy on the rational side, even though all the slogans are seemingly emotional. So we understand you. It's all about you, blah, blah, blah.
We're on your side, kind of.
Of course, exactly. But then you ask consumers, do they actually feel that way? Hell no. And that's kind of the opportunity that we see, because on the rational side, things will be copied. But emotional, how can you make the customer actually feel? That's something that we believe is differentiated.
So a few years ago, I remember reading a survey that said the top 10 least liked brands in America were all banks, right? And I think I know why. But I'm curious, if you get to build a bank from scratch, how you build in that sort of empathetic layer, right? Because you build a company that you want to interact with, right? But how do you make sure that the thing that you're building is something that everybody else wants to interact with as well? And there's a layered question on top of that. Is there a generational change that's taking place, do you think?
I'm not sure if it's generational. A lot of our customers, yes, demographically, they tend to be younger.
But Vietnam's just a very young country anyway,
exactly,
right? So
exactly.
It is what it is.
But the way we think about it is rather our customers are early adopters, because trying a new service requires a certain level of trust.
Yeah.
And of course, young people tend to be more trust-giving because they're open to new experiences.
And also, they're not old enough to be cynical yet at some level, right?
Exactly. I mean, there's kind of a flip side of that. They still believe if a bank says we're on your side.
That they are. But it's good and bad, right? But at least you're working in a way that's thinking, I want to differentiate by being good.
Exactly. And actually, it all starts from the people that we hire. So 95% of the people working at Timo today do not come from a traditional financial services background. They come from different industries. Everybody is exposed to finance, but different industries, and they want to build Timo into this financial company that they wish they had for themselves.
Right. So how do you do that? Do you know what I mean? I interviewed hundreds, if not thousands of people when I was working at Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs. And I interviewed, I think, in a way that was very different from the people with whom I was working. Right? We were in a risk-taking business, and I always, like, the first question I would always ask people was, what's the biggest risk you've ever taken? And I'll tell you a funny story about this. Yeah, because I wanted to know, like, are you comfortable with risk? In a way, you can teach the trading stuff, but you can't reach the comfort. So I was interviewing this guy who was like 30-something years old. He said, the biggest risk, I remember. My mother made me play hockey with 10-year-olds when I was 7. And I'm like, that's a 28-year-old story. Right? So I'm not
That's
sure.
some deep trauma.
Yeah, some deep trauma. So I did not recommend him for the job. He took the job and failed miserably. And I think part of the reason why he wasn't comfortable with risk. But what you're trying to hire for is not necessarily risk, but for humanity. So how do you judge that kind of stuff?
So within Timo, we're trying to look at 2 things. Radical authenticity. So people who are very comfortable with who they are. And that's both for good, bad, and ugly because we all have those.
Like sorry, but those shoes are horrible is radical authenticity.
Hey, those were sponsored.
I was just kidding.
Be careful.
But I mean, look what I'm doing.
But exactly, radical authenticity being one.
Right.
The other thing is kind of people who have a point to prove.
But how do you find that out?
It's actually quite easy if you see what people fight for, and if you go into their history and where they come from and what they it can be any point to prove. But I'll give you an example. Our current head of growth, so he's never worked for a bank or a financial services company before.
Right.
But he used to work for a browser company in Vietnam.
Okay.
And Vietnam is one of the weird countries where you actually have a local browser which has about 10-15% market share, has been around for 10, 20 years.
Makes sense, though.
It's profitable.
Yep.
And our logic was very simple. This guy, he saw the fight against Google.
Right.
And could survive.
Yep.
We've got the fight against big, powerful financial companies. So it's actually same. And whether we sell browsers or financial products or that feeling, those are kind of these examples that we love to see.
That's a great story. How do you understand the feedback about whether you're actually delivering on your human first thing? Like, how do you know if what you're doing is actually working?
Yeah, that's something where my own insecurities come in. Are we just drinking our own Kool-Aid? It's really hard. And even in the build-up, I was trying to think of what kind of metrics there are around this, because believe it or not, I'm actually a very, very analytical, data-driven person.
For sure.
But I think there are some proxies that make us confident. So our long-term customer churn annual is less than 1%. So once a customer starts using Timo, really gets into it, they never leave. So in a certain way, if I hate it so much, because Vietnam is hyper competitive, everybody has 3-4 bank accounts.
Right.
So it's not a market where you only have 2-3 options and you're stuck.
Yeah.
It's very easy to switch. But if people don't, then we feel that's a proxy for value that we generate. Not a lot of people actually know me in Vietnam, know of me as Timo CEO. So sometimes, but Timo also is quite popular with foreigners.
Okay.
And so sometimes people will end up talking about Timo and then later on realize that I'm affiliated with that.
Peripherally. Tangentially. Marginally.
But so those reactions. We've got a Facebook group with 30,000 customers.
Okay, that's
we
real.
interact every single day, not around Q&A or problem solving, but around emotional things. So
have you found that there are places where you thought that the human interaction, because I always talk about hybrid experiences, right? And let's back up and go to a slightly higher level. I've seen probably 4 or 5 really, really big tech cycles. And every time one of them rolls around, and I was thinking about this last night, like, have you heard of Linux on the desktop?
Of course.
But it's never happened.
Yep.
Right? So I hear about all these things that are going to displace other things that are incumbent. But what normally happens is they get subsumed into them or combined into them, and then you get these hybrid experiences. And I think the same thing, as you mentioned earlier, is going to happen with AI, right? Because it should be there as a tool, not as an end game. And I know this is going to happen, and we can argue about this forever, but I'm sure of it because I've seen it too many times.
100%.
But have you seen places where you thought like a human should be inserted in here and then realized actually that's not necessary, and then move them to doing something else and put technology in its place?
At the micro, it happens all the time. KYC being a great example.
Oh, tell me.
So KYC, we used to have 100% offline acquisition. We have 4 physical locations in Ho Chi Minh, Da Nang, Hanoi, and Can Tho.
Okay.
Because you used to have to do physical verification.
What does that mean? So somebody would walk into like an office?
Into a coffee shop style concept where they would open an account.
Okay.
In Vietnam now, for us, it's about 99.9% digital opening, and the exceptions are foreigners. So the question is, why do we need those hangouts? And we get that question from the board all the time. But then you realize that actually you don't need the account opening trust, the human being,
right?
But you need to have somewhere where there is physical presence. And as our chairman kind of likes to joke, you never want to do it, but you want to know there's a person. If something goes wrong, you can put your hands around their neck and kind of say, Where's my money?
Yeah, because so I think about this all the time, particularly when I think about people say having AI or some kind of technology replace a human. You know, if I book on an airline and I want to change my ticket and I have a question about something that's really complicated, there's no one to call.
Yes.
And it's maddening, right? It's not money related directly, but it is kind of, I paid for my ticket. I want to make sure that I'm getting the thing that I want.
Oh, absolutely.
But if it's money related, I want to make sure it works. And are you finding this as well?
Absolutely. So offline still is huge for trust building.
Yeah.
And so I think for us, it's around convergence. What do you do online? What do you do offline? And how do you ultimately, back to the point around AI and the most human company, how do you kind of use technology to free up humans to being the most kind of value add in that area around empathy, care?
Right.
Because money is really, really emotional.
Yeah. Yeah, really emotional.
People dream of being able to travel the world. They fear that moment when you need money, don't have money. Every time you apply for credit, it's a judgment exercise. Banks don't treat it like a judgment exercise. Banks treat it like you're trying to cheat us.
Right.
We can't trust you.
But it feels like a value judgment to the person who's trying to borrow the money, right?
So that's why kind of we really, really want to figure out how can we focus on the emotional part as differentiator.
If we're talking about trust, right, and this human element of care, how can we turn insurance into this act of care as opposed to just like some kind of value add?
So we just launched a digital term life product about 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
So super early in terms of feedback and all of that. But
you must have worked on it a long time before you released it, yeah?
Even though this show is, I guess, sponsored by Chubb, and
Sponsored by Chubb.
I don't want to talk.
No, you don't
the true facts. The true facts was record time.
Good.
So it was about less than 2 months from the first time we said this is a product to live in the app.
Go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
But the point was, as you said, insurance. Nobody really wants insurance per se, but they want protection. They don't want to worry. So
and they want to be able to trust the thing that they're doing is going to work.
Exactly. And so when we talk about term life insurance, it's actually a really weird thing to sell because you're selling something that you're not going to benefit from because if I'm dead, what's the point?
Yeah, but you care about your kids and your dependents and your husband and wife and stuff like that. Like almost more than you care about yourself if you're doing it the right way.
Exactly. So actually, if you look at it, the first thing that we do is we actually ask, what is this for? Before we even talk about the product, because is it your kids? Is it your parents' health expenses or something?
Right.
Because a lot of our user base is young and they will be supporting also family. Vietnam family networks are very strong.
Very strong.
So it's really not about insurance or even digital term life. I'm not from insurance. 6 months ago, I had no idea what digital term life even means. And I'm not sure I need to, because the more I know about that, the less I can actually understand how the customer thinks and build it for that. So
that's interesting. This idea that it's an act of care for somebody else as opposed to for yourself.
100%.
So can you apply this to other financial products as well? Right? Like savings or investment, and make sure and say, why are you investing? Right? Is this again to pay for your kids' college or to make sure grandma has medical care and stuff like that?
Absolutely. And I think it goes, we need to think deeper as an industry around what are we really trying to do with these products. So if you do a 20-year investment plan and savings plan for somebody who is 78 years old, does that really make sense? What are they really trying to do? So because it's not about money per se. It is about, hey, we're trying to build a home. That's the Vietnamese dream, buying a house. It's education. It is living the life. It is all of those things. And then understanding what is it actually that this financial product is trying to solve.
Interesting. You mentioned earlier that, you know, there's this aspiration to compete with some of the biggest and incumbent companies that are already there. What are some of the challenges that are associated with that? I wouldn't say being an upstart, but just being a startup, actually. And how do you build brand trust, right? Because this is the big thing. If they trust the brand, you can kind of give them any product because they believe that it's going to be what you say it is, right? I have this thing I like to say, I do what I say and I say what I do, right? So it goes both ways. What are some of the challenges for you guys when you're trying to build against incumbents?
We find that tenure matters a lot.
What does that mean, tenure?
So we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary actually 3 weeks ago.
Got it.
And you can't buy 10-year track record.
No.
Time, you just can't buy it. So that's something where versus other fintechs and startups, we find we have a lot of advantage. But if you look at those giants, to your point, we're tiny compared with them. We're dirt poor compared with them. But that also means that the usual playbook is how much money can we deploy? So how does digital transformation work for big financial companies?
Yep.
Board will ask the CEO, what's the plan? CEO says, okay, we have allocated $500 million to digital transformation. We're going to be spending it on 100 million developer hub, these kind of vendors and all of that. That's our plan.
But massive vanity projects. Most of the time, yeah? Sorry.
Exactly. How do we think about that? It's kind of ironic because I get invited to digital transformation all the time. And what is it to transform digitally for us?
Right.
It's digital creation.
Right.
Now we're talking about AI transformation because for us now, that actually is a true thing. So how do we transform? But exactly to the earlier conversation, for us, that actually starts with the people, with the inputs. And the input cannot be money alone. We have to differentiate through rather finding a way that is different from other people, betting on something opposite.
Right.
I promise my board, I cannot guarantee success. But what I can look at is coherence of the approach, coherence of betting on people on that.
So this brings up two questions to me. They're related, but they're about different topics. The first is, as you grow, because you said you're still small, right? As you grow, how do you maintain that ethos of we have to be human first, but still using the technology? As you hire more and more people, it gets harder to drift that thing down to the first people that, the lowest people that you're hiring. So how do you maintain that? And then I have a question about technology adoption, but go ahead.
One of the things I'm quite proud about as CEO is we're growing quite quickly, in fairness. So transactions doubled last year. But in terms of headcount, today Timo has 247 people.
Okay.
And 2.5 years ago, it was 243 people.
Okay.
And that's it.
So massive hiring spree.
Massive hiring spree, 4 people. You see our interview is really easy to get a job at Timo. But the point is that whilst customers are exploding, transactions are exploding, all of that, headcount is flat because we scale as a tech company.
Yeah.
What that does mean, though, is that every seat on the bus needs to constantly rethink what is it that they're doing.
Right.
And so that's why beginning of this year internally, for example, I made a very clear statement that I expect everybody to be 5 to 10 times more productive this year than last year. Normally, you would expect 5-10% every year. But now with AI, and we're at this inflection point where we feel it's realistic to ask 5 to 10x. It's more mindset than fundamental. Exactly. Yeah. But that then frees up this capacity that those 247 people suddenly can do many different tasks that they couldn't do right now.
Yeah, we did the same thing when I was at Goldman Sachs. Every time we employed new technology, we didn't hire more people to use it. We just got way more productive. And we saw, and you'll see this as well as you continue to grow Timo, we literally saw tech installation, learning how to use it, P&L spike.
Yeah.
And it was pretty consistent actually over the 6 or 7 years that I was there. Yeah. So the other question was technology related. You talked about digital transformation, but you said you're talking about digital creation. But at some point, AI is not going to be the only new thing out there. I don't know what's coming next. You don't know what's coming next. But how do you make sure that you stay on top of that as well, whatever that new thing is, right? Because now there's all this hype, but there may be some subtle things coming that you don't know. How do you then digitally transform or digitally create constantly?
So I really like to go back to first principles thinking. And if I look at what digital transformation for me means, it's just digitization of data, meaning you can replicate, transmit at pretty much zero cost,
right.
Which is cool. What is AI really? For me, AI is just abundant, low-cost intelligence that without the digitization of the data, there's nothing you can do for that.
Which is hilarious because I did an entire recording last night with a company that just makes sure that your data is in a position to be used by artificial intelligence. Because if it's not in the right, not format, but if it's not clean enough, or if it's not effective enough, if it's not unsiloed enough, then you won't be able to use AI. So it's funny that you mentioned
What's the name of that company?
UCT, I think.
Okay.
UTC, I can't remember.
Okay, I'll check
the guys
it out.
in Kansas City.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so if we think from those kind of very simplistic, high-level, data, now intelligence applied to data, I actually think that robotics, generally forget about fintech, but robotics is going to be huge because this is all in the virtual world, but how do you now kind of jump from the virtual into the physical
world? Yeah.
But I think for us, it is always this ethos of reinventing. And we were very clear. Most people are scared of AI because most companies look at AI to get rid of people.
Yeah.
And it's very clear that most jobs are going to disappear. Most tasks that people do today are going to be gone.
Sure.
But the automation that, because what you used to do is being automated, now you're getting kicked off a bus.
But you're also freed up to do things that you could never do before, that you wanted to do.
You will have to prove that you deserve to still be on the bus. And this is where it goes back to, you can't prove that you deserve to be on the bus by being a better computer than computers. You're going to be overtaken.
Yeah, never going to happen.
But you can prove that you're more human than an AI can ever be. You can understand that piece more. And so that's kind of where things are going, in my view.
I mean, I'm pretty sure I said this to you on the prep call. Humans make very visceral connections with other humans.
Yes.
They don't want to necessarily talk to a chatbot all the time. I want to talk to Jonas when I have a problem, or even when I want to say thank you. I don't want to thank a chatbot. And that's where the connection really comes in. Okay, one last thing before I let you go. What does great look like for any company?
It's a actually key both personal and company strategy. In my life, I've so often seen things or thought, hey, I'm really smart, so I'm a 8 out of 10.
Right.
And then you meet this person who suddenly shows you, you're an 8, but the scale doesn't go to 10. The scale goes to about 100.
I was going to say.
But what that then means is, okay, now we know where the next level looks. And so this is why at Timo, don't care about customer service for banking or financial services. What is the best customer service overall? Originally, we were hiring a lot from hospitality because they make you feel welcome.
They make you feel great.
What does the best look like
when you
tech?
walk into a 5-star hotel?
Exactly.
There's not some wise guy greeting you.
Exactly.
There's the nicest person in the whole world greeting you.
All of those things. So whatever it is, one of the biggest electronics chains in Vietnam, they became really successful. And what they were famous for was that the motorbike guard, he was really friendly.
Right.
They had 2,000 stores at peak, but the first impression was really, really friendly by the motorbike guard. So looking at those things, traveling the world, one of my favorite companies actually is Kaspi in Kazakhstan. Because everybody talks about digital banking and they talk about Nubank. It's a great company, by the way, of course. Then Tinkoff became really, really cool. But somebody showed me Kaspi a few years ago, and I started looking at it. Wow, that's what digital banking could look like.
Should look like, yeah. It could look like,
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So, this kind of always looking across many different areas around the world. I guess that's one of the privileges that I have as CEO, and even these kind of conferences, talking with people like you, and just getting this exposure to what great looks like. So we then know we may be 7, and that's good.
Right.
But the scale is not to 20, and once we're 15, scale is at 50 and all that.
I always like to say, like, best practices you don't have to get from your own industry. You can get from anywhere. And you should be looking everywhere to feel like, where's the best experience? And at some level, every company should be an experience company.
Absolutely.
And I love this idea that the motorcycle guard guy was like your first interaction. And if that guy was just like, you can park anywhere.
Exactly.
But if he was like unbelievably polite, you win. Jonas Eichhorst, the CEO of Timo Vietnam, thank you so much for doing this today. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.